Welcome to Monday Night Live, the weekly training that guides professionals to financial prosperity. Join our community and let's start building your wealth.
Okay, so let's go ahead and start in on this. Creative purchasing techniques have been around for a long, long time. Longer than the banking system. Real banking in a conventional sense that we think of today really hasn't been around all that long. In fact, in the United States, in the 1800s, when the banks started popping up, they called themselves what we call the wildcat banking, because they were just anybody could be a bank. They just would throw a sign out middle of a desert and say, "Hey, we're going to be a bank." And then at the end of the 1800s, the beginning of the 1900s, some of the banks had been really well established, were larger in scale, they were regional in size. And then in 1913, I'm sure you all heard of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve was created because of some legislation that was written on Jekyll Island, North Carolina, by people who were not politicians. They were not in the government at all. They were captains of industry, and the key person was J.P. Morgan. He was the richest person on the planet at the time, and the government had been going to him for money. The U.S. government was going to J.P. Morgan to borrow money, right? Because they couldn't sell any more bonds. People weren't buying the bonds to raise money for federal programs like defense. So, see, back before the Tax Reform Act, the act that created the income tax and therefore the IRS, that didn't come about till years later. And prior to that, the government, if they had to raise money, they would sell bonds, right? That's how they did it, which would be great if they had to do that today. So when they started taxing people directly from your paycheck with the Income Tax Act, they could, in essence, raise as much money as they want whenever they want. And you and I just can sit back and watch, and we can cry Democrats and cry Republicans all we want. They both do it, right? And the worst thing is of all is they don't even when they don't raise taxes, they just print money. They print more money. And I'm going to get to the end of this in a second. So when you hear the term inflation, inflation actually refers to the increase in supply of money, right? The result is increased prices because the more money that's in circulation, people feel like, well, I can go buy more, and there's more demand, and yet there really isn't a balance between supply and demand because the money's not represented by anything. They just print it, right? And as a result, that drives up prices. So that's how you get raised prices. But in any case, back to the subject at hand. Creative purchasing techniques have been around for thousands and thousands of years, as long as people have been buying property from each other, right? Back before banking, you paid, Eric would pay Rob money for a piece of land, or Rob could finance Eric, right? Or Rob would give Eric would give Rob, 3 cows and 2 chickens and a pig, right? That was how stuff was bought and sold. And then things got more creative after that. So in any case, here we are, fast forward into the future. And in the 1950s, the first documented examples of creative purchasing techniques started showing up. And in the 1970s, all that was regurgitated in large part by a guy named Carlton Sheets. A lot of you might remember in your early days, before gray hair and things like that, a guy named Carlton Sheets on late night TV. Anybody remember him? Yep. I watched that show, must have been hundreds of times, and I finally bought the program. But he was regurgitating creative purchasing techniques that came about in the 50s. And the reason they were so popular in the 70s is, who here has been around long enough to remember what happened in the 70s? It started in 73, right? With a president named Nixon. What did Nixon do? What was one of his big moves?
The gas shortage or something?
Well, that was next. It took us off the gold standard. And it wasn't like a big thing in Congress. Yeah, it wasn't some kind of a big deal that people had a referendum on and nobody knew about it. He just announced it one day. We're going off the gold standard. It was like that, seriously. And later on, then you had the oil crisis. That was more like in the second half of the 70s. And what also happened in the second half of the 70s? Does anybody remember your parents buying a house in the late 70s, early 80s, and what they talked about?
Interest rates sky high.
Yeah. Yep. 18% was across the board. In some areas were up to as high as 21%. 21%. So people started buying houses directly from owners, and the owners would finance them at a lot less than 18%, right? And it was, in fact, it was probably one of the only ways to buy houses. So that was a creative purchasing technique to do some owner financing, right? Or if you had assets you could borrow against, or assets that you could leverage for on the seller's behalf, you could strike a deal that way. So we're going to go into some of these creative purchasing techniques today. But what I wanted to do, if Gisela, if you're okay with this, is have you reiterate what we talked about today in the commercial mastermind with the project you're working on now, the 10plex, and what steps got it to where it is now, and then we can go over some of these suggestions we made today and even look at more tonight in class. Is that okay, Giselle? Would you mind sharing that again?
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks for sharing too, by the way. I appreciate it.
Yes, you're welcome. Okay, so you want me to share where we're at now?
Yeah, go ahead and explain to people how it got to where it is, like the initial price,
Okay.
what the buyer was going to do, then he goes to winner that
Oh,
so
yeah.
people would have the context,
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
So the property was listed at 1.4. It's a 10 units in Eastern Washington, 10 unit apartment building. And I saw it on one of my local Facebook groups I'm in. And so I reached out to my investor buyer who was we connected, and he was happy. He was like, "Hey, I'm looking for multifamily. Do you know of anything?" And I said, "Yeah, actually I do." And so I gave him the first details, right? Like the apartment complex, where it is, and whatever the listing agent had posted on there. He was interested in more. And so I emailed and I got the rent roll information. I got, what else? Like what the expenses are. And it's a mom and pop operation. So she gave me what they had, the listing agent, and I gave it to my buyer. And he's someone who, this would be his first multifamily, but he's bought single family before. So he's not totally new to real estate. And also he just went through like a course that teaches multifamily. So he had these very complex calculators. And then so he looked at the numbers, and then Rob and Gary also, were going through this with me, right? And so he came up with the numbers at first lower than the 1.4, but from the beginning, it was listed as part of it can be seller finance. So that was already there, when the agent listed that. And then we got on a call, and again, I didn't know, I'm a new agent, so I didn't know the right order of these things, but we actually got on a call with the sellers and the agent before we wrote the LOI, the letter of intent. And we actually went through some of the information the agent had sent me, with my buyer on there, with his calculator on the screen, and with the sellers. That was the first call. And he said, based on some of these numbers, it doesn't look like 1.4 is a price, right, that we could pay. It just doesn't make sense. And at that point, we didn't have all the information yet. And we clarified some information they gave us, and then it came back to like 1.1. And at that moment, the seller, they were kind of like a little bit shocked, and then they were like, maybe they weren't a complete no, but they were also like, we don't know if we would go that low. And so after that, we said, okay, no problem. Let's get some, at that point, my buyer didn't have a lender in mind. He was looking for one. And so we told them that, and we said, let us talk to a lender and see what they come up with, right? because either way, my buyer needed to underwrite the deal based on what the lender would say. And so we did all that while he was looking for the lender, which took a little while. I sent out the letter of intent with the 1.1 number. And at that point, the agent reached out and they said, okay, we got the LOI. We're not going to sign it, but we want to have another conversation with you guys. And at that point, I got more confirmation on some of the information they had sent. And I also followed up with my buyer. He found the lender. So then he kept underwriting the deal. And he actually told me, based on this, we actually cannot do more than like $1 million based on the numbers. So by then we had already scheduled a call with the seller. And I said, well, we don't have to cancel it, we'll just have the conversation and share with them why we're coming up with those numbers. And it has to do with like how much is borrowing, what percentage, and also the part that he would be seller financing, right, with the sellers. And so we went back with them on another call last week. And we share that with them. And in the end, they didn't sound that surprised anymore. And also we uncovered their actual real needs, which is they want to make sure we could close as fast as possible and also get as much money as possible out of the deal to pay off the private money loan they have on the building and also pay off some debt that they have. And maybe have some money for them as well. So based on all of that, they ended up saying like, it's not so much the price. We get that it's 1 million now, but now we're trying to figure out what would work on the seller finance part for them, right? Where it works for them, but it also works for my buyer so that he doesn't go into negative cash flow. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now, so in summary so far, guys, the seller's motivation is more about time and less about money. So what that means is we have the perfect scenario to be creative, right? If they're okay on the price and they're really sensitive about time, how fast, clearly there's a reason why they want it to be done fast. We might not know what that reason is, but it's compelling enough for them to accept in principle $1 million versus 1.4. That's a huge difference, right? So of course my radar is, going beep, 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 beep. So we came up with a few ideas, but there's just a little more information you should probably have. The property was inherited. The current owner inherited the property.
Yes.
From one of their parents. And there was other siblings involved. And of course, they were not happy that this one sibling was getting this property. Mm-hmm. So she agreed to pay her other siblings a certain amount of money. And she has a loan outstanding of $275,000. Okay.
Correct.
Yeah. And then she mentioned, but didn't give any specific numbers on like there's attorney's fees that need to be paid and some other things. We really don't know any details on that, but I don't believe it's going to be, whatever that comes out to, the difference between, that'd be $725,000. I don't believe the other fees are going to amount to that. Now, the other thing is, if the buyer does get a loan from a lender, like any type of bank, conventional, commercial, what have you, they'll generally only finance a certain loan to value. In other words, so if the property's valued at $1 million, they might be at 80% loan to value on all their loans, which means they'll loan $800,000. What that means, the buyer technically needs to come up with $200,000 in this example. Well, the buyer has enough for 10%, which is $100,000, which is good because some lenders will allow the buyer to do some owner financing, for example, or get money from other sources up to 10%. As long as the buyer already has 10% to put down. They got to have at least some skin in the game. That's the actual scenario here. It was like perfect textbook scenario for some potential owner financing. So any case up, I have the chapter, I'm going to bring it up here in a minute, with 30 some odd, creative purchasing techniques. But what I wanted to do is bring this up to the group and just let you guys, volunteer and speak freely with any suggestions you might have, something you may have worked on in the past, either as an agent or even yourself as a buyer, right, or seller. And even if you're familiar with some of these things, what would you suggest? Do you have any creative ideas yourself? To us, it was obvious, owner financing for 10%. But we didn't come up with any specifics like rate and terms because that's all obviously negotiable and variable. And right now, well, this is true in any market. In any market, when it comes to financing, would you guys agree that for the buyer, the longer the term and the lower the rate is always better for the buyer? And for the seller, the shorter the term and the higher the rate is always better for the seller. Everybody so far we're on the same page with owner financing? Okay. But what are some other things we can do in the world of owner financing? What creative things can we do? So let's just go ahead and look for some suggestions here. I know Kathy's done some studying on this subject before.
Is the 275 the balance of the loan that the private lender has?
Yes.
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay, so there's no other debt service on the property?
Correct.
Okay. One option is to reach out to the private lender.
We tried that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's at a high, it's a high interest rate on it. I think it's I forget right now what it is, but she didn't get a good deal on it. It's a high interest rate. And my buyer doesn't want to work with him because I guess he was being very unpolite and unprofessional. So he said even if he was like 2%, I wouldn't use him. Yeah. So but yeah, we tried that.
So what's maybe another private lender? If you can get a private lender, that's always better than a bank, in my opinion.
Yeah,
they just look at the numbers. They don't necessarily look at the buyer. They look at the numbers to make sure the numbers make sense.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I think he's asking around his network. Yeah. But yeah, that's true. I will ask him, see if he knows any private money lenders or if he's thought about asking.
Yeah, now private money is going to be more expensive than a bank. It's going to be a higher rate. Some private lenders are going to want cash up front too. If they're going to loan, for example, I thought your guy Giselle had like 400 grand to put down.
No,
okay.
Not 400 grand. He has 10% to put down.
Okay.
That's kind of like the total, and it's a little bit confusing. He understands them more than I do, honestly, but it showed us the down payment, but that's not the cash that seller would need. So he would come up with 10% of that. The rest needs to be either, I think, part of the seller financed, and then the rest the loan.
What's the seller financing rate? What are they charging?
Oh, the lender is the lowest he could get was 8%.
No, the seller.
Oh, that's what we have a meeting tomorrow to discuss, like what they need or what they would want for interest. Because my buyer was actually pitching a little bit the last call last week, like maybe even 0%. And maybe like a few years, and then he starts paying interest rate, something like that.
Yeah, or they could also, you could do like a 0% for a period of time and then share in the rent, as a percentage.
Right.
Just, a little, could even cough up some equity, I suppose, a little bit for a period of time until the buyer could, find a new loan.
Yeah. A couple other interesting things. The seller indicated that they just wanted to walk away with a little bit of money, just enough to take a vacation or something, which I think is really interesting. Other than the 275, I can't imagine what other non-debt things they need to pay off. I know they said attorney's fees. Maybe that's from the estate, settling the estate, something. I don't have the details on that. But, also we know that I assume that they inherited a property like a true inheritance. The parent had passed away and they take title after the passing of the parent, which means their cost basis is what it is at the time that they inherited it, based on prevailing values. That's how the IRS works. You get to make that your cost basis versus, I know a lot of you probably seen situations where you come upon a sale with a family and the children are really happy because they're like, well, we did something really smart. We put the parents' property in our name before they passed away, thinking it's a good idea. Who knows why that's not a good idea? Go ahead, Dorothy. I see your smile. It looks like you're muted. Yeah.
It'll make things more complicated. If it has to go through probate, I don't know if it was in a trust.
Yeah. Well, the other big reason financially is whoever does that, if you take over the property from your parent while they're still alive, you take over their cost basis. So if they bought the house 40 years ago and there's no debt and it's been, in the case of an investment property, depreciated completely, your cost basis is zero. That means every penny you sell that property for, every penny is subject to capital gains, right? You pay capital gains the entire sale. Yeah. But if you go through a proper inheritance where you inherit the property after the passing of whoever you inherited the property from, the cost basis is the time of the inheritance, which is today's rate. And if you sell at today's rate, that means you have zero capital gains. You would have to pay an inheritance tax, typically historically has been 6% of the federal level. Every state can be different, but 6% is a far cry better than 20%, right? So, but that's one of the biggest mistakes I see people making it. And I mean, I've seen at least dozens of times over the years. They just didn't know. They didn't know.
Giselle's asking for clarity on what does cost basis mean.
Oh, so cost base. Let's say, Giselle, you buy property for $100,000 cash. That at that moment is your cost basis. That's what you purchased the property for. And then if later on you put on a new roof for $20,000, that's a capital expenditure. So you would add that onto your cost basis. So now your cost basis is $120,000. Okay. Now cost basis also, takes into account any financing. So let's say you've owned a property long enough where you pay the mortgage off, your cost basis is, theoretically could be zero if you put no more capital money, if you didn't have any other capital expenditures. Capital expenditures are big items like roofing, electrical, plumbing, HVAC, things like that you depreciate over time versus a normal wear and tear expense, like replacing a doorknob, replacing a broken step on a set of deck steps. Those are normal maintenance and repairs. Those expenses are not capitalized. You just take that expense in the year you took the hit. But let's say you did have a mortgage on the property. Your cost basis would be what you sold it for, less depreciation if it's an investment property, and then minus any principal balance on the loan, any debt. So there's rules about that stuff too. You can't just go, and some people think, oh great, I'll go get a brand new loan on this place, even though it's been debt free for a decade and I inherited from my parents. That might not fly. You got to check with your tax accountant on things like that. But I wouldn't try to pull the wool over the IRS's eyes. You'll generally, here's the rule of thumb with the IRS. If your actions are specifically to avoid paying a tax, they will consider that tax evasion. But if what you're doing, your action you're taking is for to improve a property, to whatever, anything is really related, like a business purpose, they'll consider that when they calculate cost basis. So a lot of people think, well, I'll just take a loan, and that's not necessarily going to be accepted by the IRS. So in any case, so back to the property, there's a big gap between 275 at $1 million. Now let's assume the bank will finance 80%. So they'll automatically provide $800,000. And if the buyer has 10% or 100,000, that's another 100,000, that's 900,000. So 900,000 minus 275 is 625,000. Who knows what they owe lawyers right now? We don't know that kind of stuff. But that's the range we're working in, that they can be flexible with. And the gap, what we call the gap, is $100,000. That's the difference between $1 million, the 800,000 that the lender will provide, and the 100,000 that the buyer will provide. Combined, that's 900,000. So $1 million minus 900,000, that means there's a $100,000 gap that the buyer needs to come up with. And usually a lender will let them do owner financing for 10%, which is $100,000. So that's one obvious solution. And then they can work out the terms. You'd have to figure out, the seller would have to determine what their tax situation is or what it would be or will be if they sell the property. Let's say they do have no other debt that can be written off or used to offset capital gains, like after the cost basis. That means they would have to pay capital gains on $625,000. So they might be willing to finance more than $100,000. The problem is the bank generally would not allow that unless they do a no-doc loan or a non-recourse loan. And generally that would be, in today's market, less than 50% or less of the value of the property. A bank, in other words, would often go for a deal where they finance 50% of the purchase, and they don't care really how you get the other half the money because they're going to have first position. The bank will. So if you default, the bank's going to take over and sell that property for anything over $500,000, and they're going to walk away okay. They don't care about the second mortgage. And that person's going to be, the second mortgage person, if it's a third party, would have to, make good on the first mortgage, bring it current, and then they can foreclose on the property, right? And try to get some of their money back. If they don't, all they can do is hope that the property sells for enough to pay them back, or at least some portion of it. So lots to think about, lots to consider there. But one of the things Rob brought up earlier, and we actually mentioned it in the commercial mastermind today, is there's a mortgage term called rent participation mortgage. And what it means is on these 10 units, probably some of the units are rented under market value. The rents are too low. So what the buyer could say is, look, for the next 5 years, any rent increase, I will give you, the seller, 50% of the increase, not the whole rent, just the increase portion, right? They would split the increase portion 50-50 for up to 5 years. So over 5 years, as you can imagine, they're going to be probably raising rents. And in the 5 years, there's a balloon. So let's say the original mortgage was $100,000, and over 5 years, they've paid back 50 of it through the rent participation. So now the buyer only owes them $50,000. So it's going to be really easy to get a secondary loan for $50,000 on a property that was purchased for $1 million 5 years before, and the rents have gone up. So now the property is going to be worth a lot more. Remember, on a 10-unit building, the net operating income is going to go up over the years. And those rent increases are all on the upside. Remember, on a big property or any kind of property, most of the expenses are relatively fixed: taxes, insurance, so forth, right? The only variable is going to be maintenance and repair expenses. But what I'm getting at is when you calculate net operating income, guys, and this is true for lenders and everybody else, appraisers too. If you increase, let's say the rents coming in are $10,000 a month, okay? That's $120,000 a year. And they are raised by 20%, okay, over 5 years, which is not unreasonable. That means now they're getting $12,000 a month, or $144,000 a year. That's $24,000 more than the $120,000 they were getting on the year they purchased it. So that $24,000, let's say it's a 5% cap rate. Remember, the $24,000 increased rents, is almost pure upside because you generally are not going to increase your taxes and your insurance and things like that. Okay. So 24,000 at a 5% cap rate, that's $120,000, right? You see what I'm saying? So now that property is worth $1.12 million after 5 years. It's probably worth more than that actually. But if a lender is willing to lend money on that, and they're really only showing $850,000 in debt. Remember the original mortgage for $800,000 and $100,000 under financing. That, and you've knocked it down by 50% with the rent increases. That's $850,000 from 1.12 million. That's $270,000. Most banks would lend 50,000 off the 270 equity. That's kind of a no-brainer loan. So that's a really good solution. Rent participation mortgage, because that means the other thing for the buyer. What does that mean? Let's do a quick quiz here. So if the other 100,000 is done with a rent participation mortgage, remember during the 5-year period of the rent participation mortgage, the buyer's giving the seller 50% of the rent increases. But what are they not giving the seller? What do they not have during that 5 years?
Control.
Well, they don't have another mortgage payment. Remember, during the 5 years of the rent participation mortgage, all they're giving them is the 50% in the rent increases. They didn't take out a home equity loan. They didn't do straight, a regular loan with the owner for say 10% a year for 5 years, where they'd have monthly payments. They don't really have monthly payments for those 5 years, so they can do things like improve the property, maybe sock away some money. Maybe sock away enough to pay the 50,000 themselves over 5 years, right? So it's a huge benefit to the buyer to do that type of loan, a rent participation mortgage. And it's a benefit to the seller because they know the building, they know the rents are low, they owned it. They know there's going to be rent increases and it's locked in. They're guaranteed to get 50% of the rent increases. And what does it do for them tax-wise? What does that do for the seller tax-wise?
That would just be counted as regular income, wouldn't it?
Regular income, exactly, not capital gains. So if they're in a 15% bracket, they're paying less than 20% capital gains, right? So these are the kind of things that you think of when you're doing creative purchasing techniques, So before I go to the document, I just want to let you guys open up and chime in. I'd love to hear from some of you.
I have a quick question, Gary.
Yep.
On what you were sharing, the rent participating mortgage, is that something a commercial lender, you work it out with the commercial lender?
With the owner, yeah, between buyer and seller.
Oh, so
Yep.
it's still creative finance, but because you said mortgage, I assume it was like something you get through a commercial lender. So you do it with the owner. Oh,
Correct.
okay.
Yeah. So even if you do owner financing, so Tom knows this. Tom knows my mom and my stepdad. They did some creative purchasing over the years. My parents did. In fact, when they retired, they sold an asset they had, and then they had a bunch of money. And I was actively investing at the time, and they wanted to be my bank. And I said, okay. So I would borrow money from them and pay them back principal and interest every month. There was a regular amortized loan, but the mortgage part, remember, the loan is the note between the buyer and the seller. The buyer gives the seller a promissory note. I'm going to pay you back. Here's the terms, interest rate, term, and so forth. The mortgage is what the seller gives the buyer. The mortgage attaches the note to the property. That's what a mortgage does, as well as some other things. So even when you have a non-bank loan, you still should have a note and a mortgage. I don't recommend just doing a note. I'd recommend doing a note and a mortgage if you're the seller. For a buyer, they really don't care if they have a mortgage or not. They know they're giving the seller a note, for the loan. But a mortgage, if you go into ever had litigation, any judge is going to look for a note and mortgage. And by the way, just an FYI, in most states, if there ever is a foreclosure, you cannot go to the magistrate. That automatically bumps you up to the next level, which is called in court of common pleas. That's true in most states. And at that level, you generally need an attorney. In fact, a judge could say, you need to go get an attorney. I'm not going to hear this case till you have an attorney, because they don't want average consumers being harmed in their courtroom. So remember, if you're going up against somebody who's sophisticated, they can win just based because they know the rules better than you, So that's why the court of common pleas, and I've experienced that myself. I went at the court of common pleas on an appeal because I had won at the magistrate's level, and the guy appealed it, and I went in there to represent myself. And one of the guys that sat on the board actually was my personal attorney, and he excused himself from the bench and represented me. How about them apples? Right in front of everybody. Perfectly legal. And they called in somebody else from another room to fill the spot. So I won, but not because I'm some kind of smart guys, because I got lucky because Cliff happened to be there that day. But in any case, back to the mortgage and note. Mortgage and notes generally go together, and even in private financing. So they can be combined in the same document, although I don't recommend it. I think they should be separate documents, and the mortgage would refer to the note. Has anybody ever seen one where it's combined? A lot of hard money lenders do that. They'll take a note and a mortgage, combine it into one document. Have you ever seen that, Eric?
Yes, with customers, and I've had a few myself in the past.
Yeah. But it's okay. It's not like it's illegal. I just think having separate documents, it's stronger, makes it stronger, So, okay.
Gary, I have a
guys,
quick question.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, but you don't need that if you're doing the rent participation program.
Yeah, with the rent participation.
Because with that, you're not getting a second mortgage.
Yep.
From the seller. You're actually doing a totally different program.
Yeah, technically, what you're saying is it's not a conventional mortgage, and where there's a monthly payment with principal and interest and things like that. The repayment is actually based on a different mechanism, which is the increases in rents. So that's
Right.
the big difference. But
right. So is there separate paperwork that you utilize? Yeah. But do you still use a promissory note? I assume.
Yes, you do. Yeah. From what I did one myself early on. At the time, I didn't know as much as I knew now, but we did not have a mortgage on that. Turns out that was a mistake. We just had a note, but it was recommended to us later on when we paid it off that we should have had a note and a mortgage. But really, that was the seller's. It was another property, almost like Giselle's. It was a 35 unit, and it was inherited also. And the two sons had no debt on it. One son was active. The other son was just, he was basically there for moral support, but didn't engage at all, was active at all. So we just pulled it out of our bag of tricks, and they went for it, and they were extremely low on the rents. But here's the trick. I'll tell you this. They only had it 30% occupied. Okay. So what that meant was, and our suspicion was correct, in their minds, they're thinking, well, gee, anytime they increase rents on any of these properties, any of the units, they're going to get 50% of that. But what units did it actually only apply to?
The rented ones, the
ones that were actively occupied or rented.
Yeah.
Yep. So for
Not
70% of those units, yeah, we didn't have to give them money on the other 70% of the units, So it's a pretty neat technique, and it's very rare. I very rarely hear people use that, So everybody okay with that, the way we described it and talked about it?
Do you have a sample of what one of those rent participation agreements would look like that we could get?
Well, I'd have to really dig deep. We actually did get lucky today. We found something for Brianna. Beverly did. It was an old document that has all the asset managers on it that we did business with, banks and everything. But this thing goes back prior. What I just described there goes way back to the 90s.
Wow.
I don't even know if I had a computer back then, to be quite frank with you. I mean, well, I had a work computer where I worked at the bank, but I can see if I can find something, Kay. And really
Okay.
what it is,
I was going to ask the same thing.
yeah. What you can do, guys, and we've done this before, whenever there's something really creative, really what you do is you take a standard, like a template note, and then you write in or type in the terms. You literally write in the fact that this was a rent participation note and mortgage, and here's how we're going to do this. The term is for 5 years, and the payment is equal to 50% of any rent increase, right? And I mean, you might want to beef it up a little bit, but that's essentially what you do. It's not like there's a special document just for that. There really is. You just use a standard template and then fill it in with these unique terms. Okay.
So you just put that in the end of it, or, you know,
Pretty
you have
much.
special terms. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And the mortgage, you don't have to do anything because the mortgage has a different purpose, right? The mortgage, you generally don't refer to the terms. The note refers to the terms, you know? So,
I apologize. It took me a little bit longer to log in today, but with what scenarios would this be beneficial?
so Janelle has a buyer who's put in a letter of intent on a 10-unit building.
Gotcha.
Initially, it was 1.4 million. He was going to go to 1.2, decided to get a loan on it. And the lender told him, look, we've run the numbers. This thing's $1 million is about as best as we can calculate on this. So the seller has come around to being agreeable to 1 million. They still have to have discussions surrounding it. And they have to satisfy what we call the gap. So we know the lender will only lend so much, maybe 80%, which is 800,000. And a lot of lenders will allow a buyer to get owner financing for up to 10%, but they still require the buyer to come to the table with 10% of their own money. Well, the buyer has 10% of their own money. So the gap is the 10%, you know, 10% from the buyer, 80% from the lender, the other 10% we're thinking should come from the seller and the way of an owner financing. So that's really, and the buyer or the seller only has a current note on it for 275, and they apparently have some other expenses that are, I guess, not related to the property they want to pay. We just don't know how much those are. They just made the comment, they just want to be done with it. So Melanie, their motivation is more time sensitive and less money sensitive. You know what I mean? If you look at that, they're more time motivated and less money motivated. So that opens up a whole world of possibilities for owner financing. We know that some of the rents are low. That's why we came up with that rent participation mortgage.
Nice. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. That's awesome.
You're welcome. Yep.
Is there any way that the buyer could assume that loan?
I don't think he wants to because it's apparently hard money with a real high rate, you know? Yeah. But
the remaining 10% was, or the outstanding 275, I mean, that you mentioned is hard money.
275. Yeah, right, Giselle, the 275 was a hard money loan. She may have stepped away. Yeah, it was a hard money loan. Oh, the 275, that was a hard money loan?
It's a private money loan.
Private money, okay.
Is so bad interest on that? Was that the one you said 8%, or was that worse than 8?
I believe it's like over 7.5 or 7%. Yeah.
That's actually not bad.
That's what I was thinking, because if it gets the deal done, it takes it off the plate of the seller entirely. I assume it as the buyer, even though it's not attractive because it's 7 or 8%, it's still kind of in line with what I would get anyway right now.
Yeah.
Right? And I could assume that loan, take it away from the seller. He's free and clear of it. Now it becomes my problem. I can still contribute cash to the deal that he wants to walk away with because I've got the 10% that I'm gonna do that with. Well, what do you think that looks like, Gary?
Well, I would say it'd be worth to pursue. But just so I think the buyer said, "Oh, I know what happened, Rob." The buyer talked to the lender, the private lender, and the private lender apparently didn't come across too well, and the buyer didn't want to deal with him, even if he could get a 2% loan from him.
Oh, that's right. So assuming the loan, that means I would be in that guy's pocket, and he's a jerk.
Yeah, apparently
Yeah,
that's the
because I think that's what he may have been looking to do. I think he was trying to assume the loan, maybe. That's why he was connecting to the private money lender. But then that happened. Yeah. So, yeah.
I was just thinking, assuming it would get it done, but then I don't know, what would you have to do? Assume it to get it done and then go refi that assumed portion of the loan, refi that somewhere to get rid of him? That's just jumping through another hoop.
Yeah, I mean, that would require another round of borrowing that, and because he could assume the first one, then he'd have to go to a bank and get he still has to get a loan, in this case for probably 800,000. So, I mean, I would say, Rob, if if the balance was much higher, closer to the 800,000, then I would definitely look at that as an option. Yeah. So, I mean, that.
Yeah, I was just thinking of it as an instrument to get the deal done, but you know, I would agree if the balance was larger, then certainly.
Yeah. Hey guys, quick question, unrelated. I just thought about a message I got from Neor earlier. I can't remember if I had this guy teach class or was on a podcast, but we had somebody that wants to buy mobile home. I'm not sure, not mobile home parks, RV parks. Does anybody remember that? Somebody who's an RV park buyer? Was it in class? It might have been a podcast. I just couldn't remember, and it came up just right before class. So I want to ask you guys if it rings a bell. Anybody that buys RV parks?
I have a couple of investors that are buying them, but not me personally.
We know what? Can you reach out to Neor?
Yeah.
He's on the team. Just look him up and let him know you have some contacts who like buying RV parks. So, okay. Thanks, guys. Sorry that I just popped in my head and I thought I better take care of it now. Okay, so let's do this. Any other thoughts or suggestions? You guys want to take a look at the creative purchasing techniques document?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So we're all going to get it tomorrow. So just keep an eye out for that. Let me do a share screen. Did you know that you can participate in class every Monday? We call it Monday Night Live, 7 p.m. Eastern, with me and dozens of other investor agents from around the country, in fact, the world. Every Monday, totally free. No selling, no recruiting, just straight up education on anything and everything in real estate. And we have a lot of good guests coming on once or twice a month, bringing in expertise on subjects like how to buy a house with crypto. Okay. How about them apples? What about AI? How's AI affecting our business? How about the metaverse, blockchain processing? We're already using it in title work. So come on to Monday Night Live, be ready to take notes and ask questions because it's live and engaging, and you get to participate by asking questions and meeting others. So we'll see you there. Go to realestateWithGaryWilson.com, click on the resource tab, drop down, and you'll see Monday Night Live. And in there, you can see one of the most recent classes. But more importantly, you can register for class as many as you want going up to like the end of the year, I believe. So in any case, do that. We'll see you on Monday Night Live. Look forward to meeting you in person. Take care. Okay. Okay. Can you guys see this?
Yeah, you see your Zoom right now, Gary. Oh yeah, you can. Perfect.
Okay, great. So this, you don't really have to read the front. I'm not going to read through this because I don't want to, you guys can all read. What I want to do is skim through and look for, potential opportunities here. So but real quick, by the way, you always want to gather the facts first. And one of the facts you want to gather is, what are the sources of creative financing, right? And number one, there it is right there, the seller. Number two is the property, okay? Number three is other investors. Number four are partners. And I'm assuming this guy wants to buy it himself. He's not looking to get into a partnership. The tenants, you can, for example, you can use, in a lot of cases with lenders, they will count prorated rents coming in to the new buyer. They won't count security deposits because those belong to the tenants, but you can apply incoming rents, for the first month to the purchase price. Real estate agents and brokers who want to maybe take a note in lieu of their commission, right? So let's say you're selling a big property, maybe a million, maybe 10 million. instead of taking 3%, which in the case of a million would be 30,000, is that right? 10%, yeah, 30,000. You could take a note for the 30,000 with 10% annual interest rate on it, right? So you earn interest on your commission, and then you eventually get the commission. I've seen that done. Services and skills. Maybe the buyer has certain skills, like maybe the buyer's an attorney and can do whatever these sellers have to do that require attorney's fees, do it pro bono, that kind of thing. Existing loans on the property, that's what Rob was bringing up. And just a note, if you guys want to write this down, some of you may remember back in the wintertime, and I think it was the second half of January, we had a guest teacher, and it was showing us how a lot of mortgages today actually are assumable, where we're always been told they were not assumable. FHA, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, what have you. The difference
that's what I remembered when I brought that up. Yeah, was that speaker.
Yep. Exactly. Yep. So the difference is, in the old days, when you assumed the mortgage, you did not have to qualify for it. You could anybody just take over the mortgage. But nowadays, lenders want you to qualify just as if you were applying for a brand new mortgage on your own. You have to qualify to assume the mortgage. It's called a qualified assumption. And what's beautiful about that is when rates are 7%, and we know a little over a year ago, rates were still 3%. And let's say you find somebody that's wanting to sell, that's owned the property somewhere between 1 and 5 or 6 or 7 years, the rate's going to be 3%. I would ask for the mortgage documentation to see if it's assumable on through qualification. And I'd rather take over a 3% mortgage than get a brand new 7% mortgage, knowing I've got to come up with more money to give to the seller to make up the difference, like the equity gap. But I'm happy to do that. If I can get a 3% mortgage payment, well, I'm a happy camper. All right.
Gary?
Yes.
So when assumable, I was under the impression that the interest rate though would be higher. You wouldn't get the old interest rates. That would be more like subject to. Or is that incorrect?
No, it's a subject to is a variation of an assumption. It's just an assumption involves the bank. The bank's going to qualify the borrower, but they will give the borrower literally control or the benefit of the original mortgage with their rate and everything. They won't raise the rate on it. That would be a brand new mortgage if they did that. Subject to generally requires a trust document to be used, put the property in a trust. Then the buyer can take over the mortgage payments for the seller, take over the property subject to the mortgage of the seller. But because it's in a trust, the bank can't call in a note. It's in the legislation, banks cannot call in notes on properties held in trust. So, any case, good question. Let's see, unsecured paper and secured paper on equities. So let's say the buyer has people that owe him money. He has notes from people that owe him money. He could assign those notes to the seller, okay, in lieu of equity in the property, right? And then finally, you've got institutional banks and lenders. And what's funny, guys, is you hear people say all the time, particularly in the investing world, they try to not use banks. They want to do private funding and financing as much as possible. And I understand the logic and understand why. It's because if they're too highly leveraged, they won't be able to get traditional institutional bank loans. And also, with a lot of private debt, private borrowing, a lot of cases, those notes and mortgages are not recorded. So they don't show up when somebody does a background check on your credit check, okay? But to me, all that spells potential trouble. Why would somebody be so afraid of having a note or mortgage that's recorded? That's the seller's detriment. I would never take on a note as a seller and not record it. It could be disastrous, I mean, they could take on a second loan the day after you sold it to them. You wouldn't even know about it. And then that loan gets recorded. Guess which loan gets to be in the first position? The second loan. Yeah. And you could be out of luck. And I've actually seen that happen. So in any case, institutional banks, I actually prefer them because that's always going to be the lowest rate. You almost always get the lowest rate from a big bank in great terms, right? Does it go against my credit? Absolutely, but I'm okay with that. And here's why. If you guys want to write this down, this is not part of the class on creative purchasing techniques, but it's a big rule of thumb that everybody should remember. When you or your clients are acquiring properties, it's expected to be that they will be highly leveraged, 80% leverage, even 90% leverage. I was never more than 80% leverage myself, but my guideline was to not be more than 67% leverage. So how did I accomplish that? Well, in periods of rapid growth, I would put down 20% to finance the other 80 and do that for a period of months that I have a bunch of new properties. But over the next year, I would work on them, improve them, raise the rents, let people's leases expire, put in new tenants at higher rates, and get it up to, right, where the income was higher. And remember, how are income producing properties evaluated? It's based on the what?
Income.
Income. Yep. And remember, rent increases are all upside because your monthly costs are generally fixed. They're relatively static. So any rent increase is all upside. So if you increase rents by $100 and you're at a 10% cap rate, that means you've added $1,000 to the value of the property, right? So on an annual basis. So in any case, that's what I would do. I would, fix them up, raise the rents. Now I'm getting more income coming in, which we'll talk about in a second. But more importantly, now I've elevated the value of the properties. So I went from 80%, right, 80% leverage to down to my 2/3 leverage, right? The other ratio is in reverse. It has to do with income and expense. So I would make sure I never owed in principal, right? And not interest, just the principal of my principal portion of a payment. Principal and interest, not including taxes and insurance and so forth. I never wanted that to be more than 1/3 of the income that was coming in. And it's in total that they're looking at all your properties and your job and your investments and everything else. But let's just take it one property at a time. If I was bringing in $1,000 in rent, I didn't want my principal and interest to be more than $333, right? And that's a classic age-old ratio that banks have to determine if they're going to loan money to somebody. It's based on the net income, not the gross income. If it was gross income, it'd be more like 40%. So I was able to increase my income on the income expense part of the balance sheet, and I was able to increase the value, increase the equity based on improvements to the property, capital improvements. So I would grow rapidly, take a year off, pay everything down, raise the rents, and I hit my ratio. And I never had a problem getting money from banks. In fact, it got to the point where I no longer had to call the banks. They would call me. You got anything you're looking at, anything we could finance? This was back in the heyday when money was getting silly, and we eventually had a big market, the Great Recession. So in any case, I like banks. And if you think about the logic behind private financing, at the end of the day, what's more important? Being found out like how much you owe and how much you own, or being able to actually make money. Who thinks making more money is more important than all those other things? In business. Yeah, in terms of business, you're there to make a profit. I'm not talking about your personal life. I'm just talking about business. So in any case, let's move down here. And by the way, it is 8 o'clock, guys, Eastern. Yes.
Question. Okay.
Yep.
Did you just say you never owed more than 1/3 of what was coming in?
Principal and interest. Income expense.
Principal and interest.
Yes.
Okay. Because I was going to say that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Remember,
that makes more sense.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Now we'll tell you, as time went on, I actually started borrowing less, right? And so my debt to, or my what I owed versus what I owned, and I got it down to like 50%. Eventually either sold everything or paid everything off. That was a good feeling, right? But when you have a strong equity position, a lot of people say, well, that's silly because now you got equity sitting there, it's not being used. And I would say, not necessarily. I could go and get a commercial line of credit against that equity, right? Across blanket the entire portfolio, but because it's a line of credit, if I'm not using it, I'm not paying any interest on it, right? It's sitting there ready for me to gobble up the next big property, which is exactly what I did. So I was able to go in with cash, even though I was borrowing on that line of credit, right? It technically was cash because I could pull the money out today and make my offer tomorrow and say, look, here's the cash, right? And then on the new property, remember that new property at that point now does not have a mortgage on it. Remember, I paid for it with the line of credit that's based on the equity in all the other properties. So then what I do with that property, fix it up, raise the rents, and then what would I do? Go get a brand new mortgage on that property, pay back the line of credit. Okay. So then that property, it only has a 2/3, loan to value mortgage on it, or 50% sometimes. And by the way, what did that commercial lender do for me on that line of credit every time I added another income producing asset? What did they do? What did they do for me on that? What did they do to the line of credit?
Raised it.
Raised it. Yep. And all of that to get to that point probably took a total of, in total, probably 10 years. In 5 years, I was able to actually exercise that routine. I had, in other words, in 5 years, I had a commercial line of credit that I could use to gobble up properties for cash. But in 10-year time frame, it was, I'd gone from being independent to being, financially free at that point, and I could either keep going or not keep going. And then that's when other things happen. I won't get into the other things, but in any case, let's go down here and check some of these things out. Pledged asset mortgage. This is any asset. You could have a bank CD, you could have a boat, you could have a car. You could say, look, I'm going to pledge my assets, coin collection, stamp collection, art collection that has value, right? And I'm going to give you, the seller, ownership rights to these assets should I fail to pay you in 3 years. Then they could come and grab your stamp collection and your boat and your art collection and so forth. Or in this example, in case of a CD. But an asset could be anything that's an asset. It doesn't have to be an income producing asset. You can, so bank loans like home equity line of credits, things like that, you can use. So I did that. I've used home equity line of credits. I've used personal line of credits. A blanket mortgage is where I'm going to touch on these. Oh, sorry, I forgot that. I meant to tell you guys this. It is after 8. If anybody feels like you need to go, I understand. I'll stay on till 8:30 as usual, but we have done our hour. If you feel like you need to go, that please feel free to do so. Let me double check and make sure I get everybody promoted here. There were some folks that I didn't see pop in here. Hey, DeAndre, Justine, Anna, and I think I tried to promote you, and Phyllis, but I think you're all unmuted. There you go. Okay, so back to this. A blanket mortgage is different from a wrap. A blanket mortgage is almost what I just talked about. It's a mortgage that can encumber multiple properties. Okay, there it says right there, a blanket mortgage includes more than one property. That's essentially what I did with that commercial line of credit. I encumbered 10 properties, for example. In fact, I think the first time I did it, it was 10 properties. And you can use that to do what I did.
I did the same thing. The first time I bought 10 rental properties at once, and I did a blanket mortgage.
Now, if you do that, you should get a release clause in there, so that if you do sell one, they'll lower the principal balance and your monthly payment on a prorated basis.
Yeah, you find that out after the fact.
That's exactly right. You'll find it out after the fact when it's too late. So
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So using a broker's commission, there you go. We brought that up earlier. Let's see, buy low, refinance high. So that's the age-old BRRRR method. You buy low, you refinance, you rent it out, and then you refinance. I'm sorry, you remodel. You buy low, you remodel, rent, and refinance later, right? So you can pay yourself back if you use cash. You could do a short-term hard money loan. I don't recommend that. I know hard money loans look appealing because they make it sound easy, but just remember, it has the word hard in there for a reason, right? Yep. It's called hard for a reason. Hard terms, hard. And if you default, they're not going to be your best friend. They're not going to give you 90 days and blah, blah, blah. They're going to come after the property. Okay.
There's a lot of work too, Gary. I mean, to try and get those. I've done those too. I've done cash, all different types of things, but they also expect you, like, if they say jump, you say how high.
Exactly. Yep. I did one time just so I could try it out. And
Me too.
it gobbles up so much of your income, and it's such a big expense. It's just not worth it, So, and I'd say that would be a last resort. Create a note, sell it for cash. Again, you could create a note for any number of things that you may have. And then, or here's actually, I think what this take's talking about is this. Let's say Giselle's client offers the seller a note for much higher than $100,000, but with zero interest. Okay. Or let's do it the opposite. Let's say they offer the seller a lower note, a lower than 100,000, say like 80,000, but with a much higher interest rate. Who would agree right now a loan with a really high interest rate has a lot of value? Yeah, people want the high rate. If you get 12%, right now people are getting 4% on their CDs, and you can get 12%. They might buy the note and take the 12% interest rate. Now, in a market where interest rates are going up, this technique is not going to have as much appeal. But in a market where interest rates are going down, and you have a high interest rate note and prevailing rates are going down, you got a valuable commodity there, and you can sell it at a premium. So in other words, I gave the example of 80,000, and you got a high rate on that loan. You could sell it for 100,000, right, to somebody that wants to make 12%. So it has more appeal in a market where interest rates are going down. Now I'll let you guys read through the examples. Defer a portion of the purchase price. That basically creates like a balloon. It works great in really high priced areas. So, they could just simply say, this is Giselle's client. So, I'll pay you back in 5 years, and I'll add another 25,000, something like that. Instead of 100,000, I'll make it 125, and I'll pay you in 5 years. Or just say, let's do a note for 100,000 with simple interest of 7% annually, but I won't make you any payments. In 5 years, there will be a balloon. I've got to pay you back the entire 100,000 plus the accumulated 7% interest. See, that could be appealing to the seller, right? So there's a number of ways you can delay a portion of the purchase price. Again, here's where you can use now. This says you can use deposits. I'm going to tell you, you should not use deposits for anything other than a security deposit, because the security deposit is tenant's money. It belongs to them. You're just being a custodian for it. But I know people that will use rents, deposits, everything they can to offset some of the purchase price. I just don't think you should do that, because you could get in trouble. That's a violation of escrow law is actually automatically a felony. Okay, it's a big deal. But yes, you can use tax credits. Okay, let's say there's prorations on property taxes. You could tell the seller you'll pay their portion of the transfer tax and any outstanding property taxes, things like that. Okay, and use that to offset the purchase price. We'll just go a few more here because I want to make sure we have time for a 203B loan. That's basically a rehab loan. Generally, you do have to live in the property for 2 years to be able to do that type of loan. Home equity loan, you guys all know what that is. land contracts. These are sort of what you've all heard. You all know Lou Brown and his program for subject to purchases. Well, he also teaches using land contracts. And we used to have an agent in my firm that did nothing but land contracts. And essentially what you're doing is you're putting a property you're selling it it's basically a trust. It's a land contract. And what happens is you get some of the rights of ownership, but you don't actually get the deed to the property till some later date. You put that in your document. It's sort of like buying something in trust where you get some of the beneficial rights, but you don't get the actual ownership for a period of time. They used to be a lot more popular. They came about because at the time it was, people were trying to figure out how to buy land. That's why it's called a land contract. It wasn't until later that people started using it to buy actual houses. There's pros and cons to the owners and the sellers. One of the cons to the buyer is from the time you actually take over the property to the time you take full ownership, you get the deed. The seller could die. The seller could go through a divorce. The seller could just stop making his mortgage payments, and the bank comes in and takes over. All kinds of things could happen. So, in any case, there's always good and bad to everything. Just make sure you read through the example so you understand it. Let's see here. Life insurance policy loan. You've all heard of that. So somebody with a whole life policy with a big cash balance can borrow against that to buy a property. Or they could give the seller a note saying, look, I've got $1 million life insurance policy with 800,000 cash value. I'll write a note granting you 100,000 of the cash value, as collateral for me paying you back in 5 years. And if I don't pay you back, you can exercise your right. So, people use whole life and universal life policies and index universal life policies a lot out in the business world. You'd be surprised how much. Lower the price, raise the rate. We kind of mentioned that earlier as a possible technique. Move a private mortgage from a first position to a second or third position. Remember, if there is a default, whoever holds the note that's in first lien position, that's why they call it a first mortgage, has all the rights. If you're in second or third position, the only way you're going to get any rights at all is if you pay off the first, you bring the first mortgage whole, okay? And then you can then foreclose on a property. But what they're saying here is, let's say these people had their private mortgage. It has to be paid off, right? The seller mortgage 275 has to be paid off. What they could do though is potentially leave that there, and then the bank would take first position by moving this loan into a second position, and then maybe that loan could be assumed. So that's a possibility, right? That could be a possibility. And the first mortgage bank might go for that as long as they're not too highly leveraged, or they're comfortable with the loan to debt ratio on the property. So in any case, obtain a new mortgage and pay off existing loans and provide down payment money. So this is a tricky one. And briefly what it is if the property has enough value, right, and the existing loan is low enough, and the banks are in a friendly, lender's friendly market, a borrower's friendly market. And I've seen this done before where they will literally provide the money for the down payment and to pay off existing mortgages, right? And that new loan becomes the new first mortgage. There may still be some equity that the buyer has to arrange payment for the seller, but that's essentially what this is talking about. It sounds crazy like, well, isn't that what they're doing anyways when you get a new first mortgage? Well, technically, yes, but this is leaving equity on the table. Rental participation, we talked about that earlier. Satisfy the seller's needs. I mean, that's pretty obvious. It's what came up with Giselle and her client. We found out what the seller's needs were. I can't believe they showed their cards, but they did. And it really opened up a whole other possibilities. Using discounted bonds. Again, that's probably not something you'd want to be doing right now because bonds have not been selling. I mean, the interest rates on bonds for the last decade have been historically probably as low as they've ever been. There's just not a viable technique. Discount a bond is, let's say you have bonds. Let's say you have bonds with a low rate and interest rates are higher now than the rate on the bond. The only way to sell the bond is to take a hit on it, on the value of the bond, right? You're going to sell it for lower than what you paid for it. Who wants to do that? So let's see, using equity in one property to buy another, that's pretty straightforward. The wraparound mortgage. So this is a tricky one. And you do have to be careful of this. This is where you actually get a new mortgage on the property and you basically keep the old mortgage on the property. And what happens is you're paying the owner, the old owner, the principal and interest on the new loan, and it should be enough for them to cover the principal interest on their existing loan. And the difference is there's part of their equity, right? But again, who could think of one big risk here? If you buy a property and you're doing owner financing, giving the owner a big wraparound mortgage, keeping the old existing mortgage in place, what could be one big risk for the buyer there?
If the first mortgage isn't getting paid.
Foreclosure. Yeah.
Yep. Exactly. So that's why you have like subject to when you put things in trust. So I wouldn't do this unless I put the house in a trust first, But in any case, again, there's times and places for all these things. I'm not going to go into all these guys. There is a bunch of federal, state, and local real estate related programs. There's so many different groups of people that can benefit from these, and you may be on this list, right? But there's a lot of these in here. I mean, I'll just sort of show you. The federal programs are first, and I don't know how many page of these there are. But there's a lot. It just goes on and on and on. In any case, why don't we go ahead and stop here? At the end, we talk about, I'll just show you. At the end, some of the biggies are 1031 exchange, partnerships, lease options, rent to owns, and things like that. Okay. They're all towards the back end of this document. So, did I say partnerships? Partnerships are in here too. So you guys can, you'll get this tomorrow. And I wouldn't recommend read the whole thing. It'll take a long time, but I would scan through it, look at the subject headings and see which ones you think you may be able to use in today's market. And just sell that may be a good exercise for you to take a look at that too and see if you see any other possibilities. Even share it with your client, share it with your client. I don't mind.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're
Well,
very welcome.
can we ask a quick question, Gary?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So like my quick question is like, there's so many things, I guess, with creative finance, right? It can go so many ways. Like, how do you know which is best out of all the different ways that exist?
The one the seller will take. Yeah.
Just keep presenting one by one though, right? You're not going to tell really, everything.
Actually, it's going to be easier than that. So you're going to have the conversation with them tomorrow. They'll tell you exactly what they need, and then, you can suggest, well, I understand, you can always make sure you always repeat back. I understand you to say, this is what you require. And they're going to give it in terms of, time and money, right? So within the two frameworks of time and money, there's all kinds of variability. So that's why I'm saying you could tell them, say, look, the buyer is willing to give you 10% if we can defer the interest till the end of 5 years. We'll have a 5-year balloon. We'll give you $100,000 for your remaining equity, and we'll do 10% simple interest for 5 years, and we'll just let it accumulate. So in the 5 years, the balloon is the $100,000 plus the accumulated interest over the 5 years. So that way, they're delaying their capital gains. They're getting what they need now to go on vacation and stuff, assuming what else they owe. The banker's happy. As long as your buyer's happy, everybody's happy. But I wouldn't go in there with 10 different techniques. I would go in with maybe, honestly, two options, right? And one of them would be, go in. Here's two easy options. Say we could go in, reduce the gap from 100,000 to say 80,000, but we'll raise the interest rate. The benefit to the seller is they have a lower capital gains bill, and now they have a really appealing note that they can sell on the open market at a premium. They can sell the note potentially for 100,000, because if it's showing a 12% rate of return, nobody's getting that right now other than the private lenders. So you see what I'm saying? So go in. One option is lower the principal, raise the rate. Another option is raise the principal and lower the rate or eliminate the rate, and then just say, we'll give you 125,000 in 5 years as opposed to 100,000 now. So within that framework, you got some variability, but it gives them two options, two ways to think about it. Then they'll look at their tax situation and know what works best for them. They might just say, can we just get paid every year? We just want to get our principal back and some interest every month for 3 years. Can we do that? And then as long as your buyer is okay with it, he can, the income will justify that monthly expense. That would be awesome. Between you and me, Giselle, with a new investor like that, one of my concerns would be, he's going to have stuff pop up. He's going to need a new furnace. He's going to need a new door, a new window. It's just going to happen. So I would suggest and encourage him to lower his monthly outlay as much as possible. So if it was me and I was brand new, knowing what I know now, I would try to delay payment on that 100,000 gap as long as possible. Let him get through the first 3 years, being able to absorb the headaches that are going to pop up, vacancies, all kinds of stuff happens, So, pest treatment.
So that would mean potentially paying zero interest, right? What?
Yeah, just saying, look, can I pay you the rest in 3 years? And you want to give them some interest on that. Either raise the principal and not have any interest rate, or lower the principal and then give them a higher interest rate. But just let it accumulate and accrue over some period of time. I'd say at least 3 years. If he gets through the first 3 years and he's still the owner and he's making a profit, he'll be okay. He'll have the mental skills and the confidence to go forward and do more.
Okay.
And wasn't it said that the seller wasn't motivated so much by time as they wanted to be able to exit with some jingle in their pocket for vacation or whatever? So the time may be of no consequence, really.
Well, time is actually the bigger motivator. Actually, they want to close as soon as possible.
That's what I'm saying. Oh, yeah. The seller wants to close. Okay. I was thinking that was said the opposite way.
Yeah. Yep. So again, my suggestion, Giselle, is try to do a quick close. It's not going to be too quick with a bank note or bank loan, but just say, look, the buyer's new at this. We're happy to do this. He's excited about it. In order for him to cash flow and be able to have something left over to absorb the stuff that's going to pop up, vacancies and repairs and maintenance and new furnaces and water tanks, can we delay? Can we accrue interest on this $100,000, owner financing? Delay any payment for 3 years, and then we'll do a balloon in 3 years and pay you the whole thing. Something like that. Yep. Let me check the chat box here because whoops, there we go. Thanks, Gary. Everyone, I'm still traveling, going to stop off. Good night. That's Catherine. Tom, Gary, Brandon Turner, Bigger Pockets is always looking for RV parks. Oh, thanks. Actually, I'll call him because I got his cell phone number for Brandon Turner. By the way, who here has picked up a copy or read the Global Investor Agent book, the book we wrote last year? Does anybody have a copy of that? Okay. Well, look at the endorsements. Brandon Turner was one of the endorsers. Or wait a second. No, he wasn't. He didn't endorse that one. No, he endorsed the 7th book. I'm sorry. Let me write that down. RV park. There must be something about these RV parks. Maybe I should be looking at RV parks.
Are you looking for a buyer, Gary?
They're looking right now. People are looking for RV parks to buy. We have RV park buyers.
Okay.
What we need is RV parks to sell, and Nayor happens to have one. See, Neor's on the team. He's not on tonight, but he has an RV park for sale in Texas, which is a primary spot for
Oh, okay.
for RV parks.
RV
Okay,
park.
I think
So he's looking for help in finding a buyer?
he's looking for a buyer. Yep.
He's looking for a buyer. Oh, it's an RV park in Texas.
Correct.
Where in Texas?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure. But if you reach him on, he's on Workplace a lot. You'll be able to. You guys.
What's his first name? I didn't get it.
Naor. Naor.
Oh yeah, I've been chatting with him a bit. Okay, Naor. Okay, I will reach out to him. Okay,
He's a good guy. He's a smart guy, and everybody on the call tonight, I'm telling you, he knows what he's doing. He just took a big parcel and subdivided it, and is selling it. Individual parcels or in groups. I mean, that's the kind of stuff I'd love to see more of you guys do. He's just a regular human being, just like all of us, but he just took action. He went to see the municipality, told him what he wanted to do, and they said, yeah, let's do it. So, and would you say right now, we need more housing in the country?
All right, I have a simple question. Hello.
Hi, Valerie. How are you?
Yes, I'm good. I'm just outside. That's why I muted.
That's okay. Hey, everybody.
A lot of
Valerie.
noise here.
Valerie
But
just
I have
signed.
a question. Yes.
Oh, go ahead, Valerie. I'm sorry.
Hello, everybody. So quick question. My friend asked me, his father sold a piece of land in North Carolina. He didn't hire an agent. He hired a title company, and the buyer brought a lawyer. So now several days passed. After the closing, but so far his father didn't receive the money. So he asked me if I could do something to help his father. So in this case, can I do anything? Can he hire me to do anything?
No, he needs an attorney for that. If he sold something and didn't get paid, he's going to have to hire a real estate attorney. Yep. But in any title company in North Carolina, they're almost all owned by attorneys. If they're not, they have an attorney on retainer. That attorney will be a good place to go to start with. I would ask him who did the closing. Call that closing company and ask for the return. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I told him. Because the transaction is already closed, I don't think I can do anything for what I can do for him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Everybody, welcome Valerie, because Valerie's just started signing documents today to join the team. So
Great, welcome.
Have any agent in Colorado? Do we have any agent in Colorado? Events.
Oh yeah. Jody Desmond is in Colorado. Craig Cannon is in Colorado. They're all on the team roster. So when Sugar gives you access to the team platform, you'll see everybody's on there. Yep.
All right. Okay. Because I have a friend. He just sent me a link about a property in Colorado, asking me about the situation.
Okay.
I think I told him I don't know about the situation there, but I can refer him to someone. Yeah. Okay. So later maybe I will contact with Sugar. Yeah, later. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Hey guys, by the way, for all the folks who are actually on the GIA team Nick, this Wednesday is our monthly GIA team call. I definitely think you should be on. The reason is we have an investor coming on, Peter Veskelman, who I met a lot of years ago through the Go Abundance Mastermind group, and he buys properties all over the country. And he heard about us, and through another EXP agent, he found me, and we talked today. And he has money. He wants to buy as many properties as he can right now. And he said it doesn't matter where they are, he'll take a look at them. So make sure you're on Wednesday night, and tell the other agents that are not on tonight, make sure they're on Wednesday night. This is going to be a different, unique team meeting. And if I hadn't met him personally, and I didn't know Ivan, who's the EXP agent, who's already worked with him can vouch. He's legitimate. I mean, the guy's he'll give you his numbers. He's going to tell you what he's looking for. Then you can go hunting. And he's probably purchased over 4,000 properties by now. So that's a serious investor. So make sure you're on. If you're looking for business, Wednesday night would be the place to be. Okay,
Does
guys.
he partner?
What's that?
Does he partner or does he want to own them all?
He may. He's very creative. He's very creative. So, Corinne's properties, I mean, if she's willing to be reasonable, she might be able to get a lot of these things sold, okay,
Yeah,
So-
that's what I'm thinking. Good.
Yep. Yeah. So make sure you guys are on Wednesday, and then next Monday, let me just double check here because I think I swapped some things up. What we did tonight was going to be next Monday. Yep. So next Monday, I'm going to surprise you. Then we'll figure out by Wednesday what we're going to talk about next Monday. I decided I'm not going to have the guy on that was supposed to be on tonight because if he couldn't, I'm not going to chase down juvenile delinquents. So, any case, you guys have a good night. This was a good session. I hope you got a lot of ideas out of this. And the key is to read and study how creative purchasing techniques work. And it'll generate, when you look at the situation, here's an age-old lesson, and it comes from the world of science, is this. Whenever there's a problem, just the act of looking at the facts and gathering information, usually that's the answer will present itself within the activity of gathering facts and information. Does that make sense, guys?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Yep.
So true. Like attention to the creative force, you can see it.
It is. Yeah. You just gather the data and the facts, all of a sudden you realize, wait a second. It's like putting a piece of a puzzle together. You start to figure it out and you'll come up with the answers. It's amazing. So, yeah. That was one of our famous sayings in NASA. So in any case, I could go on and on. Don't let me talk about NASA. We'll be here all night. Yeah. You guys have a good night. What's that?
Good night,
Okay.
everyone.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for participating.
Great call.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching this episode of Monday Night Live. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and go to realestatewithgarywilson.com to join our community and start building wealth today.